My parents said they wouldn't attend my engagement dinner, he's just a barista. You could have married into money like your cousin. My cousin sneered, imagine wearing Etsy jewelry to your own proposal. I whispered, you'll see why I said yes soon enough. 3 days later, a viral post hit 6 million likes, and my fiancé was named the youngest tech CEO of the year. Growing up in my family meant your value was measured in LinkedIn milestones and family WhatsApp group announcements. Graduated valedictorian? Announced. Landed a job at Deloitte? Pinned. Got engaged to someone with an Ivy League degree and a family yacht? Group call incoming. When I introduced Jonah to them for the first time 2 years ago, they didn't even try to hide their disappointment. My father didn't ask him a single question during dinner. My mother smiled politely but spent the whole meal cutting her food into tiny, silent pieces. He's sweet, she said after he left. But is that enough? I asked her what she meant. She replied, sweet doesn't pay for a mortgage, beta. My father had already made his opinion known. He printed out an article from the Wall Street Journal titled Why Millennials Can't Afford to Get Married, and left it on my nightstand the next time I visited home. So when Jonah proposed, I didn't expect cheers. I told them over the phone. My mother said, congrats, and immediately followed up with, do you want to reconsider before we send out any announcements? My dad didn't say anything. The silence lasted 8 full seconds before the line went dead. I waited for a follow-up call that never came. We planned our engagement dinner ourselves. Small, cozy, in the back patio of a local wine bar in Cobble Hill. The food was from a friend's catering business. My dress was off the rack. Jonah wore a suit he hadn't taken out since a college interview. I didn't care about the details. I cared that it was ours. My parents didn't RSVP. Divya, my older sister, texted me that she had a conflict and wouldn't make it either. But Rishi and Priyanka came. I think they showed up out of obligation, or morbid curiosity. Halfway through dinner, Priyanka's passive-aggressive comments started. About the ring, the lack of real floral centerpieces, how she was surprised we didn't just get engaged in the coffee shop Jonah worked at. Rishi added to it like it was a team sport. Don't get me wrong, he said, everyone's got to start somewhere. I just didn't think you'd settle. Jonah didn't flinch. He never does. He's used to being underestimated. Maybe that's why he works so hard, not to prove people wrong, but to prove himself right. They didn't know that every evening after his barista shifts, he was at his desk with 2 laptops and a whiteboard full of code. That he turned down interviews at Google and Meta because he wanted to build something of his own. They saw a barista. I saw a builder. When Priyanka mocked the Etsy ring, handmade from recycled gold by a local artist, I wanted to scream. But instead, I just leaned in and whispered to her, you'll see why I said yes soon enough. 3 days later, I woke up to 47 unread messages on my phone. I thought someone had died. Turned out something was born. Jonah's LinkedIn post had gone viral. A story about how his company, CoreVantage, had officially launched its flagship product. A cybersecurity tool that helped small businesses protect customer data with zero-knowledge encryption. A niche solution, but apparently one that had caught the attention of a federal agency. They'd signed a multi-million-dollar contract with Jonah's startup. The story got picked up by a major tech newsletter, then retweeted by Elon Musk's cousin. Don't ask how that happened. It landed on the front page of Hacker News. Then TechCrunch. Then Bloomberg. Every update came with a new headline. Barista turned tech CEO secures major gov contract. Brooklyn startup disrupts cybersecurity market overnight. Meet Jonah Park, the quiet genius behind the new wave of data protection. It was surreal. Reporters began reaching out. Jonah's inbox looked like a CVS receipt. Venture capitalists were offering him deals left and right. One investor who previously ghosted them after a pitch meeting sent him an email with the subject line, "Hey Jonah, any room at the table now?" I sat on the couch that morning, coffee in hand, scrolling through comments. People from Jonah's past, college friends, former coworkers, were tagging him, congratulating him, calling him brilliant. One of them wrote, "Knew you were going to make it. Always admired how you kept your head down and did the work." My heart swelled. I looked over at Jonah, who was still half asleep in a hoodie, brushing his teeth. He didn't even realize his life had changed. And then the phone rang. It was my mother. First, a pause. Then, we saw the article. She said it like someone reading off a weather report. "It's impressive," she added. I waited. "We'd like to come over. Maybe get to know him better." Just like that. The same woman who once told me, "You'll struggle every day with a man who can't keep up," now wanted an invitation back in. My father followed with a call of his own. He didn't apologize. But he asked questions about the business. About Jonah's patent. About the company structure. The man who once sighed every time I said the word freelance now wanted to be part of our life again. Even Divya sent a message. "Looks like you backed the right horse," she wrote. Not congrats. Not sorry. Just that. I let the text sit for a while. A few hours. Then a few days. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. But I did feel something colder, like the final click of a door locking behind me. For so long, I had craved their approval like oxygen. But now that I could finally breathe without it, I wasn't sure I wanted them back in the room. Jonah, of course, didn't say much. He never gloated. Didn't make a big deal of the sudden shift. That was never his style. "They're your family," he said one night, when he noticed I'd been staring at my phone too long again. "You can let them in, if you want. Just, don't do it for me." I knew what he meant. He wasn't looking for their praise. He didn't need their applause. He hadn't worked himself into exhaustion over the last 2 years just to get validation from people who couldn't see past his apron. No, this had never been about proving them wrong. It was always about building something he believed in. Something that mattered. But for me, it was harder to let go. There's this invisible thread that ties you to the people who raised you, even when they hurt you, even when they disappoint you. It's not forgiveness that comes easily, it's habit. And sometimes, habit makes you answer the phone when you know better. So I agreed to dinner. Not with everyone. Just my parents. We met at a quiet Indian restaurant in Edison, halfway between Brooklyn and Princeton. The kind of place that plays soft sitar music and smells like cardamom and ghee. I hadn't been there in years, but my mother still called ahead to ask for a non-spicy option. They were already seated when Jonah and I walked in. My father stood up halfway, then awkwardly shook Jonah's hand across the table. My mother gave a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. We made small talk. Very small. The menu. The weather. The traffic on I-95. Then the questions started. "So Jonah," my father said, unfolding his napkin with unnecessary precision, "I read about the encryption algorithm. It's impressive. Is it proprietary?" Jonah nodded. "Yes, and filed for patent approval. We've got legal counsel helping with the paperwork." My father raised his eyebrows. "Smart." Then, as if realizing he sounded too complimentary, he added, "You'll want to be careful. The big players, Cisco, IBM, they'll come sniffing around soon enough." Jonah smiled, polite as always. "We're ready for that." I could see my mother watching him closely. Not in admiration. More like she was trying to figure out how she missed it. Like someone who misjudged the value of a stock and now regretted selling early. By the time dessert came, they were treating him like a guest lecturer. Asking about business plans, scalability, product market fit. And Jonah, sweet, humble Jonah, answered every question with quiet confidence. Never showing off. Never throwing their past words back at them. He didn't need to. He'd already won. That night, back in our apartment, I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through old texts. Messages from my mom 2 years ago, you sure this is the right match? Think about your future, not just your feelings. My father's comment from that same week, you'll outgrow him. And now, here we were. The world hadn't changed. But the way they saw us had. They respected success. Not love. Not hard work. Not quiet resilience. Just status. It made me wonder, if Jonah's startup had failed, if he'd still been working the morning shift at the coffee shop, would they still think he wasn't enough? Would I? That last thought shamed me more than anything else. The next week, my cousin Rishi sent me a voice note. I debated deleting it without listening. But curiosity got the better of me. Mira, he started, sounding less cocky than usual, so, congrats, I guess. Jonah's really pulled it off. You must be proud. I waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. Just a pause. Anyway, Priya and I were thinking we should all get together soon. Maybe double date or something. Let me know. I put the phone down. It wasn't just them trying to crawl back. It was the entire extended family. Aunts who once whispered about my poor choices at weddings were now commenting heart emojis under Jonah's announcement post. One of my uncles even sent me a link to a tech event in Mumbai and said, "You should both come. It's good networking." No one mentioned the things they'd said before. The way they'd dismissed him. The way they'd made me feel like I was wasting my life. Not one word of apology. It felt like they were trying to rewrite the story in real time, like they'd always believed in us. Like they'd never sneered at the ring, or the man who gave it to me. One afternoon, Jonah came home with 2 iced coffees and a small white envelope. I picked up the mail, he said casually. You've got something from your dad. I froze. The envelope was plain. No return address, just our apartment number scrawled in my father's handwriting. Inside was a short note, Mira, we were wrong. Your mother and I didn't see what you saw. That's on us. Jonah's a good man. He didn't need to prove anything to us, but he did. You didn't settle. You chose right. Love, Dad. I read it twice. Then 3 more times. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. It didn't feel like healing. Not yet. But it was something. A starting point. A sliver of acknowledgement in a sea of silence. And somehow, that felt heavier than any insult they'd ever thrown. I folded the note and placed it back into the envelope without saying anything right away. Jonah didn't press me. He never does. He just placed the coffees on the table and sat down across from me, opening his laptop like it was any other day. Like everything wasn't suddenly shifting beneath our feet again. I stared at him for a while. His hair was a mess from the wind outside. He had ink on his fingers from scribbling notes. He still wore the old gray hoodie he'd had since college. The same one my mother once called sloppy. And yet, here he was, gracious, brilliant, loved by millions of strangers, and slowly, tentatively, being acknowledged by the people who once laughed him off. Are you okay? He asked without looking up. I think so, I said, but my voice didn't sound like mine. I was tired. Not in the way that sleep could fix. More like the kind of tired that builds up when you spend years justifying your choices to people who never really listened. The exhaustion of trying to convince your family that love, stability, and growth can exist outside of a 6-figure income or a fancy last name. Jonah and I had built something real. Not just a relationship, but a foundation. The long nights, the ramen dinners, the rent checks that left us with barely anything for groceries. The compromises. The late-night coding sessions. My own moments of doubt. All of it added up to something that was ours. Now people wanted in, but it felt like they only wanted the final product, not the journey. A week after the envelope arrived, my mom called again. This time, she sounded different. Not guarded, not robotic, more human. Almost timid. We're having dinner at home this weekend, she said. Just us. No extended family. I thought, maybe you and Jonah could join? I hesitated. I'll cook your favorite, she added, like she knew she needed to offer something more than just a seat at the table. I agreed. But something inside me stayed cautious. Jonah was warm about it when I told him. It's progress, he said, pouring tea into my mug. It's something. I didn't correct him. I didn't say that sometimes progress feels like a test. The Patel house hadn't changed much since I left home after college. The walls were still the same cream color. The framed graduation picture still hung in the hallway. My childhood bedroom still had a stack of SAT prep books in the closet, and a dry-cleaned lehenga I never wore again after Divya's engagement party. But the air had changed. When we walked in, my father actually got up from the sofa to greet us. My mother hugged Jonah first, then me. She smelled like jasmine oil and turmeric, like every weekend memory from when I was a teenager. Dinner was quiet at first. My dad asked Jonah about how the hiring process was going. My mom passed us extra puris without comment. The silence between each question was heavier than the answers. It wasn't until after dinner, when we were having chai in the living room, that the conversation shifted. My mom looked at Jonah. Do you still work at the coffee shop?" she asked. It wasn't an insult. Not this time. It was curiosity. Maybe even concern. Jonah chuckled. No, I left last month. It was time. We're expanding the team, and I'm needed full-time now. She nodded slowly, as if processing that he no longer needed to have one foot in the real world to be taken seriously. And Mira, she asked, turning to me. Are you still doing the advertising writing? Copywriting, I said. Yes. I'm freelancing, but I've also started consulting for some of Jonah's clients. Tech needs a lot of words explained simply. That seemed to land well. My father, usually stoic, actually smiled. You always had a way with words, he said, surprising me. It was the first time he'd complimented me about something that wasn't a test score. The evening ended without drama. No raised voices. No accusations. Just a series of awkward, quiet acknowledgments stitched into the fabric of an otherwise ordinary night. On the drive back to Brooklyn, Jonah was silent for a while. You okay? I asked. He nodded. It was weird, but nice. Yeah, I agreed. Weirdly nice. And then, more softly, but it doesn't erase the past. I know, he said. But it's a start. The next morning, I opened my inbox to find an email from Priya. Subject, brunch? She wrote, let's bury the hatchet. I think it's time we started over. No pressure. Just us. I stared at it for a long time. Priya had always been competitive. Not openly malicious, but constantly calculating. When she met Jonah, she barely made eye contact with him. That night at the engagement dinner, she'd spent more time Instagramming the charcuterie board than talking to anyone. And now, suddenly, she wanted to start over? I left it unanswered. The messages kept coming though. From relatives, old family friends, even a few acquaintances from college. People I hadn't heard from in years were suddenly flooding my DMs with heart emojis, congratulatory gifts, and, more than once, OMG, you're Jonah Park's fiancé? I was no longer the one who settled. I was now the one who knew before everyone else. It felt empty. That weekend, we went to Prospect Park. Our spot. The one where Jonah had first kissed me, and where he eventually proposed. It wasn't anything grand. Just a quiet bench under a huge oak tree, the skyline barely visible through the leaves. Jonah brought takeout. I brought a blanket. We sat for a while, watching people pass by. A dad was trying to fly a kite with his toddler. A group of students were practicing a dance routine to some pop song on repeat. A woman nearby was reading a book in French. It still feels like this is all happening to someone else, Jonah said finally, looking down at his hands. I know, I whispered. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out my engagement ring, the Etsy one, the same one Priya had mocked. He'd taken it off to clean it the night before and hadn't given it back yet. He held it up. "You still want this one?" he asked. I looked at him like he was crazy. "This ring is the beginning of everything," I said. He smiled, slipping it back onto my finger. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. Jonah's viral rise wasn't just a moment. It became a movement. His quiet, humble, slow-burn success story struck a chord with people everywhere. Especially those who had been told they weren't enough, who were mocked for their ambitions, their paths, their late timelines. He became a kind of symbol online. Not flashy. Not boastful. Just someone who believed in the work. The story of the barista turned CEO turned into a keynote speech. Then a TEDx talk. Then a book deal. And somewhere in that whirlwind, I got my own unexpected spotlight. A small podcast I followed reached out to interview me, not just as Jonah's fiancé, but as a writer who had built her career in the shadows, beside the man the internet now adored. They asked about our story. Our engagement. The ring. The family that hadn't shown up. I was careful. Respectful. But honest. "I always believed in Jonah," I said. Even when people mocked him. Even when they mocked me. It's interesting how fast opinions change when the money starts showing up. It wasn't a call out. But it hit like one. The clip went viral. Suddenly, my inbox was full too. Publishers. Bloggers. Former classmates. Even a few extended family members who had once rolled their eyes when I said I was trying to make it as a writer. Now they wanted to collaborate. Interview. Connect. And one email stood out. From a lifestyle magazine, South Asian Living, that often did features on successful Indian American families. They wanted to do a spotlight on emerging South Asian couples redefining success. The editor wrote, "We'd love to photograph you both for the next cover story. Maybe in your Brooklyn home? It would be nice to include some family perspective, perhaps your parents or cousin?" I stared at that sentence for a long time. Family perspective. Funny how that worked. I said yes. But on one condition, I would write the feature myself. Not just the story. The full editorial. I wanted full control of the narrative. They agreed. After all, I had the background, the audience, and the unique angle. It would be a win-win. So I wrote it. I told the truth. Not the cruel, exaggerated kind. Not the revenge porn version. Just the real version. The one people don't usually put in print. I talked about the cultural pressure. About how some families still equate worth with status, and how painful it can be when your own parents don't believe in your happiness because it doesn't look like someone else's. I described how our engagement dinner felt like a test we hadn't been allowed to study for. How I had to pretend I wasn't heartbroken by their absence, just to make it through the night. And then I wrote about the moment Jonah's name hit 6 million likes online, and how none of it changed who he was. The article went live the following month. And the cover? That was the best part. Jonah and I, in our apartment, sitting barefoot on the floor, sharing a pizza. The Etsy ring visible on my hand as I held a slice mid-bite. The caption? "She said yes long before the world did." My parents saw it. So did Rishi and Priya. I didn't hear from them for days. Then weeks. Then finally, one morning, my father called. "I read your article," he said. "No small talk." I figured, I replied. There was silence. Then, "You didn't have to write it like that." I didn't lie. "I know." Another pause. "We've been reflecting. Your mother and I." I waited. "We want to do better. Not because of Jonah's success. But because we missed too many important moments. And maybe Maybe we don't deserve to be there for the next ones unless we change that. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. I didn't promise anything. Instead, I told him we were hosting a post-engagement celebration, a love and resilience party, we called it. Not fancy. Just us, a few friends, and some of the people who'd stood by us since day one. He asked if they were invited. I said, yes. If you come as parents. Not as investors. The night of the party, the apartment was buzzing. My best friend Salma brought homemade cookies. Jonah's business partner showed up with champagne. My old writing professor even popped in with a first edition Toni Morrison novel as a gift. And then my parents walked in. Not overdressed. No designer bags. Just, present. They brought a simple bouquet. My mother hugged Jonah first this time, and this time it felt real. Later that night, I found my father on the balcony, staring at the skyline. It's beautiful, he said. Your life. You built it yourself. Jonah and I built it, I corrected. He nodded. I'm glad you didn't listen to us. So am I. A few weeks later, I received a wedding invitation. From Rishi and Priya. It wasn't for their own ceremony, but for the renewal of vows party they were throwing, an elaborate weekend in the Catskills. There was a dress code, a hashtag, and a schedule that included drone photography and a champagne wall. Jonah and I didn't go. Instead, we took that weekend off. Just the two of us, in a cabin upstate, no cell service, no email. We cooked together. Read books. Talked for hours. On the last night, as we sat by the fire, Jonah reached for my hand. No regrets, he asked. None, I said. Just closure. And that was all the revenge I needed. Not silence. Not revenge served cold. But success, on our terms. And the quiet satisfaction of knowing we'd never need anyone's permission to be happy again.